Hello, Internet! Today I want to talk about miniatures, specifically miniatures for the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. One of the groups that I belong to for players of the game, someone had posted a thread asking about what sort of miniatures were out there, where they could find them, and some information. I had replied with some photos of my own collection, talking about the different manufacturers that are out there and a few tricks that I've used to find some and hunt for them. And another member came back on and they asked that I maybe post a gallery with some more of the information that I had. And I figured, hey, why the hell not? So today I just want to talk about the miniature lines that are out there for the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. Being a 35-year-old game, there isn't that much of a selection out there. The type of game that it is doesn't really encourage the use of miniatures. A lot of the players don't use them. So the manufacturers of minis just haven't produced that wide of a selection. In fact, a lot of the miniatures that I look for now were originally made in the early 1980s because there isn't that big of a selection that I could only go with the newer and the nicer miniatures. In fact, my entire collection can fit into a single locking case. This case I got from Reaper Miniatures Kickstarter a few years ago. It's really nice. It is 3 layers, locking case. Each of the compartments is big enough to house a human-sized mini pretty easily. You can see that I still have plenty of room in there for any more that I find. But for now, this single case works well compared to what I have as far as fantasy miniatures or sci-fi miniatures. One case is actually extremely small. But the miniatures themselves, like I said, a lot of them came from Grenadier, which is no longer hasn't been in business for a while. Their mini line, it was a 25 millimeter, which is a little bit smaller than what we find now. So they seem to be a little off scale compared to any new minis. With these, I'd really like the one on the right, Sidney Greenstreet from the Maltese Falcon with his ridiculously large head. There's a few others that you can find also from Rapham. Rapham is the company that actually makes the official Call of Cthulhu line now. I like the fact there's a little Fu Manchu in the middle. I need to get around to painting him. And with the Rapham miniatures, these are from their new Horror on the Orient Express line. Those are very good miniatures. Those are in the 30 millimeter size range. I've got them primed. I haven't painted them yet. Here you can see a original Call of Cthulhu 25 millimeter next to the newer miniatures that you'll find now. So it kind of looks like a Hobbit side by side with them. I also like the Charlie Chan miniature that's on the right hand side. I had a player when he was talking about what he wanted to play as a character. He said, I want something that's like Charlie Chan. I was like, wow, there actually happens to be a Charlie Chan mini, so I jumped on that. There's just a couple different lines. One of the things you'll notice is with newer miniatures, they have the plastic bases. Those are extremely popular. But with the bases, they're oftentimes so large that I find them difficult. So I will find 15 millimeter bases. I order them from a company out of England called Hassle-Free Miniatures. So any miniature that their legs are close enough together, I put a 15 millimeter base on it. That way it doesn't take up so much room on the board or in the case. These are a few of the journalist minis that are out there. Once again, notice the staggering size difference. Reaper Miniatures also does the Chronoscope line, which is where some of these come from. They also have a kind of a enjoyment of long coats, which I do too. So these are some nice ones. They're not called Call of Cthulhu. You actually pretty much have to go to the Reaper Miniatures website, go through Chronoscope and some of their other lines, and just individually choose ones that work well with a 1920 sort of game. There's a few thugs that they have, nothing too spectacular. Some gangsters. You can't have 1920s without the use of Tommy guns, so they all have their Tommy guns. Female miniatures are also extremely rare for Call of Cthulhu. They're rare for any role-playing game, but being the fact that the selection of Call of Cthulhu minis is already small, that means finding a selection of female Call of Cthulhu minis is extremely difficult. It's a bit of a problem if you want to have a lot of female NPCs, or if you're like me and I play with a female player. So in order to find a good PC miniature for them, I have to dig around and say, does this work? Does this work? And sometimes she says yes, and the rest of the time she's like, well, I'll deal with it. I can handle that. Earlier ones, these 1920s flappers, these all came from Grenadier circa 1982, I believe. So once again, we're looking at 30-year-old minis. Most of these are actually just cast in lead, so just be warned, these are the old lead minis from the days of yore. The middle miniature here, the one with his arms outstretched, I sort of regret getting him. His arms being so wide makes him very difficult to put into a case. He's one of the only ones that doesn't fit perfectly into one of the compartments in that case. He's kind of towering above a early Grenadier, sort of Indiana Jones, who now looks kind of like a child. You'll also notice the two base sizes. So that's a good example of the hassle-free miniatures 15mm versus the larger, I guess think about 20mm base that a lot of minis come with now. But the guy who's spread out, his legs are too far apart to use one of the smaller bases on, because the guy's just hogging as much room as he can. Here we have a few, I guess, big game hunters. The one in the middle, he's from Rapham. He always reminds me of the guy from Jurassic Park, clever girl. So anytime I look at him, I think of Jurassic Park. A few police officers. These are also from Rapham. So nice police for your investigators to either have to call upon or quietly dodge when the police get called to whatever shenanigans the players have going on. And just a few others. These seem to be some foreign police officers. I believe one of them is from Morocco. The Rapham has different collections that they do of miniatures. I buy a lot of mine off of eBay with different lots. Sometimes I get them and I don't have anything else in the collection or really know what they go with. But if we start doing international games, I've got some different police officers from different parts of the world, and there's some detective, I think, on the far right side holding out his badge. A few more thugs or brigands. The one on the right is supposedly holding a kosh, or I guess a blackjack, but it kind of looks like a big dong to me. So maybe I'll paint it flesh colored or some candy purple and giggle when the players keep asking what that is. Some doctors that Rapham has. The one in the middle sort of reminds me of the Shadow, the way he has his collar popped up around his face like that, kind of hiding. Then the one on the right has got a saw and an apron, so he's sort of a mad scientist, I believe. I guess some gentlemen. There's a doctor on the left-hand side. I haven't painted him yet. He's from an expedition pack from Rapham. The one on the right with the awful plaid pants, I used as an NPC because I knew there was no way that a player character would want a miniature of just a guy holding a golf club. So I went ahead and painted him, gave him the ugliest pants I could paint for him, and he will probably be an NPC forever. Their cultist line, once again, Rapham. Aleister Crowley on the left-hand side, from a very famous picture of him. One on the right with the Egyptian motif is sitting on some form of throne. This is off the newer Rapham line from the Horror on the Orient Express batch of miniatures. Sort of servants on the train, a conductor, a waiter. The waiter I actually use quite a bit for a lot of our games because there's always butlers or different sort of wait staff around for a lot of the adventures. Some more servants. Once again, if you notice the Odd Job mini in the middle, and I couldn't resist getting a miniature of Odd Job. I forget what they called him when they made him. They can't call him Odd Job because of legal reasons. They can't call him Random Task because of Austin Powers, but he had some name that was similar. He's sort of towering above sort of a cadre old butler, I believe, and some manservant. And we have another mobster with his Tommy gun and a diver. I've used that diver miniature. I had a player that was his very first thing he wanted to do was play a diver, and I said, well, I guess I'll pick up this really interesting diving miniature as just an excuse, because why else would I want it? Some townsfolk, also from Ratham. I don't use these very much, but the newsy gets the most use. There's always a good need for the characters to ask tips from the newsboy, or the newsboy delivers a message to their door because someone paid him a nickel. So the newsy one I use quite a bit. The left one is Reaper, I believe. I believe that is a chronoscope. The right miniature is also from the Horror on the Orient Express line that Ratham does. Ratham, on their older Call of Cthulhu line, they actually have a 7th edition Call of Cthulhu minis, and then their older ones that are actually separate on their website for whatever reason. These are also the smaller ones, but they like to do everything in packs of 3. So you find 2 really great miniatures, and the third one is kind of a silly miniature where you got somebody cowering, another one running with a big tentacle slithering up beside him, a guy on his knees begging for his life that came with the thugs. These are not the greatest miniatures to use because, well, what do you use them for? You have a player that always looks like they're cowering, which maybe some people like. Now I say that, but then the girl on the right with the torn dress and the butcher knife above her head, I ended up painting and using for the Call of Cthulhu Dead Light scenario, because there is a character that the players meet and the investigators meet that actually follows the description of this disheveled woman that looks like she's insane. So sometimes you do get to use them as specific NPCs, but it's one of those things you have to buy a pack of 3 miniatures, but there's only 2 that you can really use. Now, also for the game, and these aren't official Call of Cthulhu anything, is vehicles. Ratham has a few sets that have cars, but the cars they're like any other miniature. They're lead, they're molded, you have to glue them together, the wheels don't move, they're heavy. I found that the Lesney Models from Yesteryear series by Matchbox, and I was lucky enough on eBay to find a box that had several different cars in it, and these are absolutely perfect because they're also the right scale for the miniatures. So you can see there's one that I stuck in the middle between those 2 vehicles just to give a sense of how large they are. They're larger than you would find with a lot of the toy cars that you find now. I like to use these cars a lot because players love them. Anytime you put them on the board, they will be played with and rolled around, and engine noises and tire squeals will accompany any chase scene that you do. And all you have to do is just pick them up off of eBay. Now, they've been discontinued for years, and there is a collector's market. So if you're looking for ones and you find some that are new in box, and they've got extremely high prices, those are collector models. So you can either find them in kind of a lot like I did, or go through and snipe some of the ones that collectors are not as interested in because they might have some blims. Since I'm not collecting them for resale value or anything in the future, I play with them on a board as like a toy car. I'm not concerned if they're mint, but I highly recommend the Lesney series of cars for a Call of Cthulhu game. They add a whole lot of fun. They're beautiful little models, and once again you get to have a table of players suddenly devolve into 7-year-old children as they roll toy cars across the board, and that is priceless. There are a few smaller human-sized miniatures that I keep in my case. There's a few ghouls. They're terribly out of focus, so I apologize about that. Some deep ones. The Ratham deep ones look more like frogs than any of the other images that I see of deep ones. Now, Lovecraft originally described them as fish frogs, so I suppose these are probably pretty accurate for whatever it was he was envisioning, but they always look very goofy to me. There's one on the right hand side, it's kind of squatting, reading a book, I guess like he's on a toilet, and the others are in menacing poses. Some Grenadier Bayaki. Now it's actually the same miniature. They give you two of them, but they're identical. This one I actually got in the blister pack, the original blister pack that was yellow with age. And there was a little piece of green foam that they had put in the blister pack that had dyed the minis on the side that was facing the foam. So you can see some of that green on the right hand side. The one on the left, it's flipped around, but its other side is just completely green from being pressed against this little wedge of foam for 25 plus years, waiting for someone to finally buy and open it. And so along I came and I pulled them out and saw that they had been permanently stained. So I'll be painting over that when I get around to painting them. There's a Servitor of the Outer Gods, and then there are some Reaper miniature floating tentacle monsters of some sort. That once again, this came in a lot of Cthulhu minis that somebody was selling off. So I ended up with these floating tentacle beasts. No idea what to do with them. They're not officially Call of Cthulhu monsters, but they're definitely Lovecraftian. I used one of those to represent the Deadlight itself when I did the Deadlight adventure. Moon Beast and a baby Moon Beast from Rapham. Rapham, for some reason, likes to stick little extra things in their monster pack, so sometimes you'll have a tombstone or a column of skulls or a baby version of the monster like they did with this, and they also do it with the Shoggoth. Migo. The Migo on the left side, its wings glue on, which made it too big to actually keep in the case. The one on the right with its wings sort of tucked up can fit, and that's nice because that way it's protected and I can carry it if I need to have the game at someone else's house. But the one on the left, because the wings are glued there, and that is the point that most people would pick it up, since I play with the miniatures instead of just display them all the time, that is a concern point for me because I'm always worried someone's going to pick it up and accidentally just squeeze that little bit too hard and break one or both of the wings. There's a Proto-Shoggoth on the left hand side, and then a very old miniature, I believe it is Grenadier. It came with a lot. I believe it is supposed to be one of the serpent folk, but I don't know. I've never seen it anywhere else, so it might just be a D&D mini that ended up in there when I was trying to buy a lot of Call of Cthulhu minis, but I figured I might as well stick it in. And then there is the Chthonians. So the front two look like just a bunch of noodles spilling out of some sort of, big gourd or something. Have sort of almost a Thanksgiving theme to them. Being the early era of Grenadier, they didn't have a very good way to represent all the tentacles like they can now. So then behind it is the Rapham Chthonian, and a baby one below it, because Rapham just loves to give you a baby version of the giant Eldritch Horror that you purchased. So all in all, I ended up with 4 Chthonians. So eventually my players are going to have a very, very horrible time when we do some adventure and I get to throw all of those on the board at once and hopefully not murder them all. But that is it. That's all that I have. So once again, the different companies that a player or GM can find these is Grenadier, which is no longer in business. Some of their molds have been sold and been reactivated, but it's kind of difficult to find them. None of them have the original names anymore. But Grenadier, if you're doing eBay searches, Rapham, who does the official Call of Cthulhu line, has a pretty decent selection. Not amazing, but a pretty decent selection. And then, of course, you have Reaper with some of their Chronoscope line and a few of their others. Rapham also has their USX line, which isn't any particular theme that I can tell. Sometimes it's sci-fi, sometimes it's Wild West. There's just a bunch of random miniatures in there. And I've gone through their catalog and found a few that were not in their official Call of Cthulhu line that worked very well with the Call of Cthulhu line. But the best advice I can give is just search and search and search. And if you are on eBay, definitely look up the Lesney's models of yesteryear, because adding toy cars to the game to represent your cars is just a lot more fun than buying a solid metal, model car that you have to assemble and paint and hope the wheels don't break off as the glue snaps or anything. So, hope you enjoyed this. If you have any comments, just list them below. Any questions, put them there. Of course, like and thank you for listening.